Most people believe their mind wants them to improve, grow, and succeed. But the truth is more complicated and far more interesting. Your mind does not prioritize growth first. It prioritizes stability. It prefers what is familiar over what is beneficial, and what is predictable over what is helpful. This is not a flaw. It is not weakness. It is a design feature that exists for one reason: survival. Throughout human history, anything unfamiliar could represent danger, so the brain learned to treat change as a potential threat before it evaluates whether the change is actually good. That ancient protective mechanism still operates today, even when the danger is something positive like advice, opportunity, or support. So when you feel resistance to something that could help you, that resistance is not proof that the help is wrong. It is proof that your brain is cautious. Understanding this single principle changes how you interpret hesitation. It is not failure, it is protection. When helpful information appears, the brain runs a silent internal calculation. It asks questions instantly and automatically. Is this safe? Is this familiar? Does this require effort? Will this change my current identity? If the answer suggests uncertainty, the brain slows you down before you even realize it. This is why people can understand something logically, but still struggle to act on it emotionally. Logic and instinct are processed in different systems, and instinct almost always speaks first. That instinctive voice is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to keep you within known territory. From the brain's perspective, familiar discomfort feels safer than unfamiliar improvement. Predictability equals safety. Uncertainty equals risk. So when someone hears advice that could genuinely improve their life, the first reaction is often resistance, doubt, or dismissal. Not because the advice is wrong, but because the brain is designed to question anything that might alter the current pattern it already knows how to manage. This is why real change often feels strangely uncomfortable even when it is clearly beneficial. The discomfort does not come from the improvement itself. It comes from the brain adjusting to unfamiliar territory. Imagine walking a path you have never taken before. Even if the path is safe, your senses heighten, your attention sharpens, and your body becomes alert. That heightened state is not danger, it is adaptation. The same thing happens mentally when new ideas challenge old patterns. Your mind increases caution because it cannot predict the outcome yet. Many people misinterpret that cautious feeling as a warning sign that they should stop. In reality, it is often a sign that something new is happening. Growth rarely feels calm at first. It feels uncertain. The brain is not resisting progress because it hates progress. It is resisting unpredictability because unpredictability has historically meant risk. Once the new pattern becomes familiar, the resistance fades naturally without force. Consider how often people say they want change but still feel pulled toward their old habits. That pull is not a lack of motivation. It is a neurological preference for efficiency. The brain loves patterns it already understands because they require less energy to run. New behaviors demand more attention, more focus, and more processing power. So the mind gently steers you back toward what is known, even if what is known is not ideal. This is why progress can feel harder than staying the same. Remaining the same uses existing wiring. Changing requires new wiring, and building new mental pathways is effortful at first. But here is the important distinction: effort does not mean something is wrong. Effort means something is being built. When people understand this, they stop interpreting difficulty as a stop signal. Instead, they recognize it as a construction phase. And construction phases are always temporary, even though they rarely feel that way while you are inside them. Another reason the mind rejects help is because help often implies change, and change threatens identity stability. Identity is not just a belief about who you are. It is a predictive model your brain uses to anticipate your own behavior. Over time, your mind builds expectations about how you respond, what you attempt, and what you avoid. These expectations create internal order. When advice challenges those expectations, the brain experiences a prediction error. Prediction errors require correction, and correction requires energy. To reduce that demand quickly, the mind may dismiss or downplay the new information. It feels easier to say that won't work for me than to update the internal model of who you are. This reaction is automatic, not deliberate. The brain prefers being correct about the past to being uncertain about the future. Help, therefore, can feel destabilizing because it suggests a different version of yourself than the one your system has already stabilized around. There is also a subtle emotional component. Help can highlight gaps between where you are and where you could be. That comparison creates awareness, and awareness can be uncomfortable. The brain often seeks to reduce discomfort quickly. One way it does this is by minimizing the value of the information that triggered it. If advice exposes an area of improvement, dismissing that advice restores emotional equilibrium. This is not ego in a dramatic sense. It is emotional regulation. The mind prefers coherence over contradiction. When helpful input challenges existing self-perception, tension appears. Removing the input removes the tension. This is why some people react defensively to constructive suggestions even when they asked for them. The defensive response is not proof that growth is impossible. It is proof that the brain is prioritizing immediate stability over long-term adaptation. Stability always wins in the short term. Adaptation wins over time. Interestingly, once something new becomes familiar, the resistance almost disappears. The same advice that once felt intrusive can later feel obvious. The difference is not in the advice itself. The difference is in repetition and exposure. Repetition reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers the brain's threat detection response. When the nervous system no longer treats the information as unpredictable, it no longer signals caution. This is why gradual exposure works better than sudden transformation. Small repeated interactions with a new idea allow the brain to recalibrate safely. Over time, what was once questioned becomes integrated. The mind begins to treat the helpful behavior as normal, and once something is normal, it no longer feels threatening. The brain protects what it recognizes. If new patterns are repeated long enough, they move from foreign to familiar, and from resisted to protected. That shift is subtle but powerful. Understanding this process changes how hesitation is interpreted. Instead of seeing resistance as proof that something is wrong, it can be understood as proof that something is new. The mind does not instantly accept change, because acceptance requires predictive certainty. Predictive certainty requires repetition. Until repetition occurs, resistance is simply the brain asking for more data. That perspective removes unnecessary judgment. It reframes doubt as a temporary phase rather than a permanent barrier. The mind is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a system that updates cautiously. When given consistent exposure to new patterns, it eventually recalibrates. What once felt uncomfortable becomes manageable. What once felt foreign becomes expected, and what once felt resisted becomes routine. This is not motivational language. It is simply how adaptive systems operate when stability and change are carefully balanced. To understand this more deeply, it helps to see resistance not as a decision, but as a sequence. First, new information appears. Second, the brain evaluates whether it matches existing internal models. Third, if it does not match, a prediction gap is detected. Fourth, the system decides whether updating is worth the effort. That evaluation happens extremely quickly and usually below conscious awareness. If the cost of updating seems high, resistance appears. If the cost seems low, curiosity appears. The key point is that resistance is not random. It is the result of an internal calculation balancing effort, certainty, and familiarity. This means hesitation is often a signal that the brain is weighing change, not rejecting it outright. Recognizing this sequence changes how the experience feels. Instead of interpreting resistance as failure, it can be seen as processing. Processing takes time, and time is part of adaptation, not an obstacle to it. Many people assume that understanding something intellectually should automatically change behavior. But intellectual understanding and behavioral adaptation are processed in different systems. Knowing is fast. Rewiring is gradual. Knowledge can be accepted instantly because it requires recognition. Behavior takes longer because it requires integration. Integration means the brain must update predictions about outcomes, effort, and safety. That process cannot be rushed because predictions are built from repeated evidence. This is why someone can agree with helpful information yet still struggle to apply it. The gap between knowing and doing is not laziness or lack of intention. It is the time required for neural systems to recalibrate expectations. When expectations change, behavior follows naturally, but until expectations change, behavior often stays the same. This delay is not a flaw. It is simply how learning stabilizes before it expresses itself outwardly. There is another layer that often goes unnoticed. The brain values consistency more than improvement. Consistency allows it to predict outcomes accurately, and prediction accuracy reduces uncertainty. Improvement, on the other hand, introduces variables. Even positive change creates unknowns. Unknowns require monitoring, and monitoring requires energy. Because of this, the mind may quietly favor familiar discomfort over unfamiliar possibility. Familiar patterns, even unhelpful ones, are easy for the brain to simulate. It already knows what will happen. New patterns cannot be simulated yet. They have no history. Without history, the brain cannot forecast results reliably. When prediction reliability drops, caution rises. That caution can feel like doubt, hesitation, or second-guessing. But underneath those feelings is simply a system trying to maintain reliable forecasting. The brain is not choosing stagnation. It is choosing predictability. Predictability feels safe because it allows preparation. This is why sudden change often feels harder than gradual change. Rapid shifts provide too little data for the brain to trust. Gradual shifts provide repeated confirmation that the new pattern is stable. Each repetition adds evidence. Evidence builds prediction, confidence. Confidence reduces resistance. Over time, the system transitions from cautious observation to quiet acceptance. That transition rarely feels dramatic. It usually feels subtle, almost unnoticed. One day something that once felt difficult simply feels normal. The effort did not vanish overnight. It faded as familiarity increased. The brain stopped flagging the behavior as uncertain. Once uncertainty drops below a certain threshold, resistance disappears naturally. This is not motivation. It is adaptation. Motivation can start a process, but only repetition can stabilize it. Stability is what the mind ultimately seeks, because stability allows it to conserve energy while maintaining reliable predictions about what comes next. When people notice resistance, they often assume something is wrong. But resistance is actually information. It shows that the brain has detected a difference between current patterns and possible new ones. That detection means awareness is already active. Awareness is the first stage of change, even though it does not feel like progress yet. The mind must first notice a mismatch before it can consider updating anything. Without that mismatch signal, nothing would ever change. Resistance is therefore not the opposite of growth. It is evidence that growth has been detected as an option. The discomfort comes from the system comparing two states at once, the familiar and the unfamiliar. Holding both at the same time requires effort, and effort creates tension. That tension is often misunderstood as a problem, when in reality, it is a transition signal. It means the brain is deciding whether something new is worth learning. During this decision phase, the brain begins gathering evidence. It observes outcomes, monitors emotional responses, and compares expectations with reality. This process can happen quietly over hours, days, or even weeks. While it is happening, nothing may appear to change externally. Internally, however, calculations are ongoing. The system is asking one question repeatedly: is this new pattern reliable enough to replace the old one? Reliability matters more than speed. A slow but predictable pattern is often accepted faster than a fast but inconsistent one. That is why steady exposure tends to reduce resistance more effectively than sudden intensity. Gradual consistency gives the brain the data it needs to update predictions with confidence. Once confidence rises, the new pattern begins to feel less like effort and more like default behavior. That shift is subtle, but it marks the moment when learning has become internalized rather than forced. Seen clearly, resistance is not opposition. It is evaluation. The mind is constantly testing whether new information fits safely within its existing framework. If it fits, it integrates. If it does not, it pauses. That pause is not refusal. It is assessment. Understanding this removes the pressure to react immediately to every insight or realization. The brain does not operate on urgency. It operates on evidence. When enough consistent evidence accumulates, change happens naturally, often without dramatic effort. This is why some shifts feel sudden even though they were prepared gradually beneath awareness. What looks like a breakthrough is usually the final stage of a long internal process. The system waited until it had enough certainty. Once certainty crossed a threshold, the update occurred smoothly. From the outside, it may seem instant. From the inside, it was a sequence that simply reached completion. So when hesitation appears, it can be viewed differently. Instead of interpreting it as inability, it can be understood as processing time. The mind is organizing information, comparing predictions, and calculating stability. That process cannot be forced, but it can be observed. Observation creates distance, and distance creates understanding. When something is understood, it usually feels less threatening. When it feels less threatening, resistance naturally decreases. Nothing has been pushed, nothing has been forced. The system has simply completed its evaluation. In that sense, hesitation is not an obstacle to change. It is part of the mechanism that allows change to become stable. Stability is the goal the brain is always moving toward, whether someone notices it or not. And when stability aligns with something new, that is when adaptation quietly locks into place. Another important layer is time. The brain does not measure time the way we consciously do. It measures repetition. Something repeated consistently feels older and therefore safer than something recent, even if the calendar says otherwise. This is why short bursts of effort rarely override long-standing habits. The system weighs cumulative exposure, not intensity. If a helpful behavior has only appeared a few times, the brain treats it as temporary. If it appears repeatedly over a sustained period, it begins categorizing it as reliable. Reliability reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers resistance. Over time, what was once questioned becomes expected. Expectation creates internal ease. Ease creates stability. Stability creates protection. The same protective mechanism that once resisted the behavior now defends it. That shift does not happen through force. It happens through accumulated repetition that slowly tips the internal balance toward familiarity. This explains why advice often works better when revisited rather than consumed once. The first exposure introduces the idea. The second reduces novelty. The third increases recognition. Each repetition decreases the brain's need to monitor closely. As monitoring decreases, perceived effort decreases. What once felt mentally heavy begins to feel lighter. Nothing about the idea changed. What changed was the brain's confidence in predicting its effects. When prediction confidence increases, caution decreases. That is the quiet mathematics behind adaptation. The mind resists what it cannot forecast. It relaxes around what it can anticipate. Understanding this shifts the focus away from forcing immediate results. It places emphasis on steady exposure instead. Over time, steady exposure creates internal alignment. An alignment removes friction without drama. The system simply recalibrates once enough evidence has accumulated to make the new pattern feel normal. If this is understood clearly, resistance stops feeling personal. It becomes mechanical. It is no longer interpreted as a character flaw or lack of discipline. It is recognized as a stability check. Every adaptive system runs stability checks before updating itself. Without them, change would be chaotic and unreliable. The human brain evolved to update cautiously because caution increases survival probability. In modern life, that same caution can slow progress, but it also prevents instability. Once enough consistent data proves that a new behavior is safe and sustainable, the system updates naturally. The update does not feel heroic. It feels ordinary. The old pattern fades because it is no longer the most reliable option. The new pattern remains because it has proven itself stable. Nothing dramatic occurs. The balance simply shifts. Stability has attached itself to something different. Seen from this perspective, the mind is not rejecting what helps. It is protecting what it understands. Protection and rejection can look similar on the surface, but they are not the same. Protection is temporary when new evidence accumulates. Rejection is final. Most resistance is protection, not rejection. The brain is asking for repetition, not perfection. It is asking for predictability, not intensity. When predictability increases, resistance declines automatically. That is why consistency quietly outperforms bursts of effort. The system updates when it feels secure enough to do so. And security comes from repeated confirmation that the new direction does not threaten stability. Once that confirmation is strong enough, what once felt resisted becomes supported. The same mechanism that slowed change begins sustaining it. That is not motivation, it is the natural behavior of an adaptive system seeking balance. Understanding this changes how progress is interpreted. Instead of asking why something feels difficult, the question becomes what the brain is still verifying. Difficulty is often a signal that the system is still gathering evidence, not a signal that something is wrong. When seen this way, resistance stops being discouraging and starts being informative. It shows exactly where familiarity has not yet formed. Each repetition supplies data. Each exposure strengthens prediction. With enough prediction, the unknown becomes known. When the unknown becomes known, threat perception decreases. As threat perception decreases, mental tension fades. This sequence is gradual, but it is reliable. The brain always moves toward what feels stable. Stability is its priority, not speed. Once stability and change begin to overlap, resistance dissolves on its own. The shift is quiet, internal, and often unnoticed until it has already happened. So when progress feels slow, it is not failure. It is calibration. The mind is not working against you. It is working exactly as it was designed to work. Its purpose is not rapid transformation. Its purpose is sustainable adaptation. Sustainable change always looks slower than dramatic change, but it lasts longer because it is integrated instead of forced. The system must trust a pattern before it supports it. Trust is built through consistency. Consistency builds familiarity. Familiarity builds safety, and safety is what allows the brain to release resistance. Once that happens, movement no longer feels like effort. It feels natural. Not because anything external changed, but because the internal system accepted the change as stable. This is not advice. It is simply how adaptive minds function when they are allowed to learn at their own pace.